WisconsinEye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
WisconsinEye coverage of the 2014 elections continues. We're interviewing Mr. Mark Spreitzer of Beloit. He's a Democratic candidate in the 45th Assembly District. Mark, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you, Steve.
Just as programming note, WisconsinEye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. So, Mark, first time run for a partisan office, but you now hold a fairly important office in your community. Tell us about that.
I'm currently president of the City Council in Beloit, and I was first elected to the council in Beloit in April of 2011 and re-elected in 2013. I was vice president of the council for 2 years before being elected council president this past April.
2011, let's start there. You've seen then the impact of Act 10. I'm just curious, has it been good or bad for Beloit fiscally and city employees and city services?
I think Act 10 has had a negative impact on Beloit, and I've definitely seen that impact, creating an imbalance between our employees where some employees have bargaining rights and some don't. I think that's been bad for morale. The majority of our employees, as a share of the budget, our police and fire employees, of course, still have bargaining rights, and we've bargained with them, and I've been a part of that process, but I think that all of our employees ought to have those rights, and the cuts that we saw in shared revenue from the state more than outbalanced any savings that we had from Act 10, so we've really seen a reduction in Beloit's budget and a loss of public safety personnel and other employees throughout the city, and we've seen the effects of that on our community. We lost 5 police officers and 5 firefighters in the 2011 budget, and that was a result of losing money from the state in shared revenue. That's one of the reasons I decided to run, is I think we need to make sure that local government is a priority when the state's setting its budget.
Mark, if you're a member of the Assembly, then would it be one of your top priorities to overturn Act 10, or part of it, or what?
Yes, I would support overturning Act 10, absolutely. I think we need to restore bargaining rights and then sit down at the table and negotiate those solutions.
Okay. Let's talk about some specific issues. You're from Beloit, and my experience in the Capitol is legislators from your area want the interstate widened, okay? But there's a projected, as you know, $650 million deficit in the next 2-year budget of the State Department of Transportation. 2 questions. How important is the widening of the interstate to your community? Secondly, how would you, as a member of the Assembly, make up that projected $650 million deficit, please?
I think the interstate expansion is very important to our community, both because this is we're one of the gateways to Wisconsin, and we really need that traffic coming up and hopefully stopping in Beloit and stopping in Rock County. So that's critical. Also, the interchange reconstruction that's associated with that project, the I-39-90 interchange with 43 right there coming into Beloit at Milwaukee Road. The redoing of that is also going to include a local road extension that really connects a part of the city that's basically disconnected by the interstate as we currently stand. So I think that's a critical piece that's really tied to the widening of the interstate. In terms of the funding, first thing I want to do is make sure that we're segregating the money that we have and making sure that it really is all being used for transportation. And I know that's something that hasn't always been done in the past. I want to make sure that we do that going forward so that all the money we are collecting can fund these kinds of projects. I also want to make sure that we do have a balance between interstate projects and money for local roads, money for public transit, those other kinds of transit options. It shouldn't just be interstate. But in terms of funding, I think there are a number of options that have been floated, and I'm still looking into them to figure out which might be the best for Wisconsin. There's one I would take off the table, which is the per mile tax. I think that there are privacy issues associated with that unless we could come up with a solution for, I really wouldn't support. But in terms of the other options, I think we're going to need to do something. When I'm talking to people, they want the interstate, they want money for local roads. Obviously that needs to be paid for, and I think people are willing to do that. We just need to figure out the most cost-effective way and the way that really enables users of our roads to help pay that cost.
You haven't taken off the table then raising the gas tax. That hasn't been increased since I think 2006, and raising what you and I pay to register our vehicles. You're willing to consider those?
I'm willing to consider those. I don't know what's going to be the best option, but I think we need to leave those options on the table.
Okay, let's turn to schools. A big issue in the next budget is going to be what to do with school choice As you're aware, we went statewide but put a cap on enrollment of 1,000. Where are you on the issue of school choice and vouchers?
I support keeping that money in the public schools, so I would not support an expansion of that program. Ideally, we'd phase that program out. Obviously, we have to be fair to kids who are currently using that, but I'd like to see an end to that program and putting that money back in the public schools.
What about the city of Milwaukee? 25,000 kids go to choice schools or charter schools. Would you also shut it down in the city of Milwaukee, the choice?
You know, that's something I'd like to look into a little bit more and be sure to talk to legislators as well as residents in the Milwaukee area, given that that's a community that isn't my own. I want to make sure that I'm listening to people in Milwaukee. I think there are certainly concerns that I've heard about that program, and I would be very open to rolling that back, but before I commit to doing that, I would certainly want to have some more conversations.
As I do dozens of these interviews of legislative candidates, always one issue that comes up is Common Core. Do you have a position on Common Core standards, Mark?
Overall, I support the concept of it. I think there's been some issues with implementation and maybe some specific pieces around the edges that I've heard from teachers and other education professionals about, but my sense is that most teachers and most people working in education support this, and it's really something that was developed by education professionals and by our governors, and I think the politicization of it has been a problem that a lot of people are really making it a political issue, and I want to make sure that our education policies are being developed by people who know education and not just by politicians. So I would support any tweaks that are needed to make it successful, but overall I think the idea of having standards that we try to meet and making sure that we're training our teachers to meet those standards and helping our students to reach them, that's something I support.
Let's turn to health care. Federal government told all states, if you expand your MA program to more low income, we will pay for it for 1, 2, or 3 years. Governor Walker and leaders of the Assembly and Senate said, no thanks, we don't want the federal government money, and chose not to expand it. Wise decision or not wise decision?
I think it's a terribly unwise decision. It's a big mistake, and we've got people who aren't having health care coverage because of it. I would do anything that I could in the legislature to try to get Wisconsin to still accept that money so we can expand eligibility for BadgerCare. We've got people in this state that need coverage. Certainly I've got people in this district that need coverage, and I think if the money's available from the federal government and other states are taking it, we're just hurting our own residents by not doing the same.
Okay. It's so timely I'm asking all candidates this. Your reaction to Judge Crabb's ruling, which the Attorney General is now appealing in the federal courts?
I was delighted by the ruling. I've been supporting marriage equality for a very long time, and I worked in 2006 to try to convince my neighbors to not vote in favor of the constitutional amendment. Obviously, public opinion was in a different place at that point, but it's clear that a majority of residents of Wisconsin, and certainly a majority of residents in the 45th District, support marriage equality. So I was very excited by the ruling. I'm disappointed by the appeal, but I'm confident that when this all shakes out, we're going to have marriage equality in Wisconsin. And I also want to note that in Beloit, I've worked to really lead the effort that we had to extend domestic partner benefits to our city employees in same-sex relationships, and that's something that we were able to do in the meantime to make sure we're treating all of our employees fairly.
2 candidates for Attorney General, as you know, say first offense drunken driving should be a crime. Do you have a position, sir?
I think we absolutely need to crack down on drunken driving. There are far too many people who are on their 5th, 6th, even more offense, and that's just not acceptable for those people to be on our roads. But I also want to be careful about what we do in terms of treating that we recognize that alcoholism is a disease, and we need to be focusing on treating that and not just putting people in jail. So if making it a crime enables us to get people into diversion programs that address that issue, I'd be supportive of it, but I want to make sure that we're not just giving more people a criminal record and increasing our prison population, because I think that would be a mistake.
There are calls, as you know, in Washington and Madison to raise the minimum wage. Your position?
I support raising the minimum wage.
How high?
I'd support the proposal for $10.10, and then I think we need to tie it to inflation so that we don't have to keep coming back and having this as a political debate. Minimum wage should keep pace with where wages are at in the country and what the cost of living is, so let's set it at a reasonable rate that is a living wage and then have it increase from there.
I want you to, if I haven't asked you about any other issues that are important to your campaign, this is a chance for you to talk about them, but I'd like to get into it this way. What are the biggest needs of your community, Beloit?
Jobs is certainly one of the top needs. As you know, Beloit still has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state.
It does.
Part of that's a result still of GM closing in Janesville and the Beloit Corporation closing back in the 90s, some of our major employers that left, and we're still rebuilding from that. So I think that's something that making sure that the state's efforts on job creation are successful and that Beloit and Rock County, Greene County, this district gets our share of those jobs, and that's something I'm very committed to. I want to make sure that the jobs we're creating are going to pay a living wage, and that we're also doing what we need to support workforce training programs, our technical college system, UW, so that people can get the training they need to be able to take the jobs that are available. So I would say that's the #1 critical issue. The other thing I'm hearing most from people about is education, really just wanting to make sure that our schools are fully funded and that we're supporting our teachers. And I think that we've seen several different districts within the 45th pass referendum supporting their schools and increasing that funding. So it's clear that residents and voters are interested in education funding. I want to make sure that the state is. And the third piece goes back to roads and those local roads. And every town chair that I've heard from in the district says that road funding is the #1 issue. I know in the city of Beloit that we're not able to keep up with road repair the way we'd like to. I think that's a critical infrastructure need that we need to pay for now because it's going to be more expensive if we wait to pay for it later.
Just a quick follow-up question on jobs. Mark, what hasn't been tried on jobs? Is there any new idea you have to create jobs that would help your community if you're a member of the Assembly?
For one thing, I'd like to see more accountability with the WEDC, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, to make sure that that money really is tied to job creation. And I know we've seen that there hasn't always been that accountability. We've seen some of the money going to companies that created jobs overseas or loans that were lost track of. I really want to make sure that we're following up on that money, and if it's not creating jobs, we need to put it where it will. So that's part of it. And then I think we need to create a climate in the state where businesses want to grow and expand, and that includes small businesses and people who live in Wisconsin and want to start a business here. And we need to look at more than the bottom line to do that. We need to look at quality schools, quality neighborhoods, good parks, a clean environment, equality. I think those are all factors that people look at when deciding where to live, where to raise a family, and therefore where to grow a business. And this focus just on the bottom line, I think, is one of the reasons we're not creating jobs, because we're not looking at those quality of life issues that affect a community. And when we're cutting funding for local governments that provide some of those basic services and then trying to just give tax breaks to businesses to start up, I think they're smarter than that, and they're looking for a community they want to invest in.
Then finally, I want to give you a chance to highlight any differences with your opponent in the August 12th primary.
I think the biggest difference is my experience on the City Council in leadership and my effectiveness there. And being in council leadership for 2 years as vice president and now as council president, and I was elected into all of those roles without opposition, support from my colleagues. That's something that I think sets me apart in this race. And in that time, I've really been able to address some of the needs of our community and work to build a consensus on the council. And when I came on, it was not uncommon to have 4-3 votes on issues, and we've seen a lot more 5-2, 6-1, even 7-0 votes on some of the things that matter. And I think part of that is finding common ground and being willing to add an amendment to something or compromise and get to a point where most of the council can vote for something. With our domestic partner benefits effort, there were 4 or 5 council members that were supportive of that from the beginning, but I worked and ended up getting that done by a 6-1 vote by talking to my colleagues and winning their support. And I've been very proud of my efforts to support some of our local business creation. I was just at a groundbreaking for one of our new businesses, North Star Medical Radioisotopes, which should create 185 jobs to begin with, and then hopefully more after that. So that's an exciting project, and there have been others that I've supported just on a smaller scale with the redevelopment of our downtown or some of our other business corridors, and making sure that businesses had the permits they needed to come in or to expand. And we've seen the success of that. Beloit is moving in the right direction. I think this district is moving in the right direction, but we need the state to really be backing us up. And where I see myself being set apart is that I think that leadership prepares me to go into the legislature and build relationships that will be effective to represent this area. I have the endorsement of a number of my colleagues on the Beloit City Council, as well as Janice Ringhand, whose seat I'm running for, Judy Robson, who's a former majority leader in the state Senate and represented Beloit and other parts of this district, and also Dan Schoof, Chuck Benedict, Kim Hickson, who are all former representatives from this area. And I think they understand what it takes to be effective in Madison in the legislature. That's why they're supporting my campaign, because they've seen the work I've done on the Beloit City Council and they know that I have what it takes.
Thank you. Mark Spreitzer of Beloit is a Democratic candidate in the 45th Assembly District. The primary election is August 12th. Mark, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.